Welcome to Look Ahead Radio with Tom Arms and Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240. It's actually viewpoints around the world. In fact, we have joining us this afternoon Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio and also LookAheadNews.com. Tomorrow's news today. And with that, Tom, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Good evening, Lockwood.
That's right. It's evening time there in London. A little before midnight, as a matter of fact. As we prepare the program this afternoon, just curious, what's the weather like there in the UK, particularly in London?
I think we're starting to see signs of spring. The daffodils are coming up.
Well, now, is this early time for the UK, or because we're having the same situation here in our region as well? And it's February.
No, it's about the right time.
Okay.
This is about the right time. We don't actually have much in the way of flowers yet, but certainly the green bits are sprouting, and it won't be long now, a few more weeks before we see a sort of yellow display.
Okay, and what about the possibility of snow or anything of this nature? Is it conceivable? Do you have late breaking winter moments, maybe a last stretch of cold before it really does?
Absolutely. It's quite possible. I've actually seen snow in April here.
Okay.
But we did have some snowflakes last week.
All right.
On Friday and Saturday we had snow, but nothing stuck to the ground.
Does London get much in the way of snow as a rule?
No, not much. And when it does snow, you can get a quarter of an inch, and it just grinds to a complete halt.
Right. Well,
because we have no snow plows, nothing.
Yeah. Well, that's not unusual. In many of your southern states, that is the same situation as well. So that it's interesting. Same conflict as seen in like Washington, D.C. All right. Well, speaking of Washington, D.C., let's start off with that this afternoon. And, of course, Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio and also LookAheadNews.com with us this evening. The breaking story, well, actually, a story that's broken now twice throughout the day, that of Mike Flynn being, stepping down as National Security Advisor. And I'm curious about two aspects of that story while it's being played. What is the news on this in Europe, and what about the broader implications related to the various security agencies that are also spotlighted in this? So, first question: what about Mike Flynn? How is that being reported in the European press?
Shock, horror story. I think the Guardian headline was "Wow," The Guardian, in fact, basically all the newspapers here don't see Flynn's resignation as the end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
The Guardian said in its editorial that Trump is on a collision course with the U.S. diplomatic service, the security agencies, the American voters, the Democrats, and large sections of the Republican Party over the issue of Russia. And none of them are going to let it go. In the Guardian's opinion.
This is an important observation, because I can tell you that many of us here in the States don't quite see the concern with the Russian connection, but we'll get to that in a few moments. But Europe is definitely seeing this, and I'm going to bring this back. We're going to segue into that discussion here in a few moments. My next question related to that, and you alluded to it a few moments ago, the security agencies. What is the opinion of the security agencies in this case? Are they aware of the nuances and the fact that this information should never have been made public per se, and also questioning why he was being recorded in his civilian capacity before the inauguration? Has that come up?
It's being reported that it wasn't Flynn who was recorded, but rather the Russian ambassador.
Okay.
Which is probably par for the course. I mean, someone like the Russian ambassador, given the fact that they've invaded Crimea and annexed it, and they're in eastern Ukraine and everything else. Given all those facts, they would probably record the conversations of the Russian ambassador. And that's how it's reported over here. Not Flynn recorded, but the Russian ambassador.
And of course, it's sort of like standing between two people and only listening to one conversation. You can't but overhear the other conversation as well. The next question, though, is there some discussion about the fact that this did, in fact, see public communications, which is contrary to the very organizations? They do not normally release this kind of information to the public, yet they have. Is there some, I'm wondering if they see a comparison of this to, say, Snowden, for example.
No, I think they see it more of a comparison to Watergate.
Wow. Oh, okay. I find that interesting because
seriously,
no,
I think they're thinking of it more in terms of Watergate than they are in terms of Snowden.
Wow, that's interesting because in reality, this is now an agency that, or agencies, quite frankly, that are tasked with security and privacy and just maintaining close communications, and yet they've opened those communications a la Eric Snowden. All right, they don't see the comparison to that Snowden. I find that interesting. Well, since we brought up the topic of Russia, let's stay on that topic for a few more minutes, Tom. Tom Arms, of course, of LookAhead Radio and LookAheadNews.com. Obviously, the relationship of Russia and the Trump administration, there's some concerns there. How is that being played in the European press? And then other experiences with Russia. But first, what's the opinion of the Russian relationship and the U.S. in light of the fact that even President Putin has indicated that he's a little nervous now with Trump?
Well, I think they believe that Trump is in Putin's pocket.
Really?
I think people really believe it, and they think that it will come out in a congressional investigation. I think they honestly believe this. I'm not.
Wait a second.
I don't think there's any proof yet.
All right, let me.
I think that. I think looking at what Bannon has said in the past, and he seems to have a very strong influence on Trump, and sort of reading between the lines, is that they think that an alliance with Russia is important in order to contain China and to stop the threat of Islamic extremists.
Now,
and that can only be done. That can only be done with an alliance with Russia. And if Europe has to go by the board in order to get that alliance, then ta-ta, bye-bye Europe.
Okay, now you say many people.
And
I'm curious.
That's where Europeans are very afraid.
Okay, that I understand that. Is that being displayed in the media? Are those as a result of letters to the editor or comments of editorial comments that you're?
It's starting to come out, yes.
Okay, but you're seeing it in certain newspapers. I'd be interested in hearing or knowing the source of those comments relative to the media. All right. The other aspect of this, obviously, is Europe aware of the fact that there is a ship, a Russian vessel, I think it's 30 miles now off the Delaware coast, and that it does have, in fact, missiles aboard, and also they are very aware that it has a variety of listening devices. Is that getting any play in Europe?
No, that hasn't been reported.
Wow.
Of greater concern here is the fact that the Russians have this week apparently breached the 1987 treaty on intermediate range ballistic missiles and started deploying those in Russia aimed at Europe. Those were banned in 1987.
Now, of course, this is a reaction, is it not, to the recent military actions, both by the U.S. and NATO, and the increase in number of personnel and armaments recently in the vicinity of Eastern Europe?
Well, I think we then get into an argument of who did what first.
Right.
I mean, it's clear that the Russians invaded the Crimea, and they did that before there was any buildup of forces in Poland. After the invasion of the Crimea, they then built up their forces in Kaliningrad, which is an enclave on the Baltic, And the response to that was to move American, German tanks into Poland just in the last couple of weeks, and also to move British forces into the Baltic states.
Okay, now real quickly.
Now, in response to that, the Russians have said, well, we're going to put in these intermediate range missiles.
Here's a quick question before we go to the break. In light of the fact that there's opinions, as you are alluding to, that, and I say alluding, unless I'd be interested in reading the stories, that Europe thinks that we have an alliance, an additional or a secret alliance, or developing a secret alliance with Russia. Is there a feeling that might help deflate some of these concerns, particularly of a military action along the Eastern Front? Is there a feeling that this might eventually be a good thing for peace in Europe?
No.
Okay. We're going to come.
They don't. They think they're being sold out.
Okay. Stay with us. We're going to get back to that in just a moment, because I'm curious about the Russian relationship with Europe. As a matter of fact, the question coming up in a moment. What is Europe doing about Russia, and what has precipitated this problem in the recent years? It's been ongoing now for, the attack in Crimea was now 3 years old. Am I correct on that, Tom?
No. The problem with Russia goes back centuries.
Okay, we'll talk about that in a moment. Stay with us here on Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
This is Tom Arms with LookAheadNews.com's expanded world analysis for the week beginning the 20th of February. Look Ahead broadcasts tomorrow's news today so that you can plan to participate. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is off to Europe as concern continues to mount among the alliance about the Trump administration's commitments to NATO and the EU. He is in Brussels on Monday to meet European Commission and NATO officials, as well as Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel. He leaves Belgium for Germany and the Munich Security Conference. Mexico, the war, and deportations are back on the agenda on Thursday when Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Homeland Security Chief John Kelly fly into Mexico City. The two men face a cold reception, especially after Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto canceled his scheduled meeting with Donald Trump. The American Congress is moving into foreign affairs next week when a group of 27 congressmen from both parties head off to India for 5 days of talks with officials, ministers, and academics. This is the largest number of American legislators to ever visit India. The subject of President Trump's proposed state visit to Britain is debated in Parliament on Monday. The debate was sparked by a petition signed by millions, which called on the British government to stop the visit. The problems of the Greek debt and Italian financial issues will dominate a meeting of the EU's Eurogroup finance ministers meeting on Monday. Sources report that any major decisions will be postponed until after the German elections. On Tuesday, all EU finance ministers meet to discuss how to tighten tax laws for multinationals. Elsewhere in Europe, French National Front presidential candidate Marine Le Pen is off to Beirut on Monday to establish her international credentials by meeting Lebanese President Michel Aoun and his Prime Minister Said Hariri. Israeli soldier Elor Azaria on Tuesday will be sentenced for the manslaughter of a Palestinian terrorist. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wants him pardoned, while the Israeli military are adamant that he should be punished. Azaria faces up to 20 years in prison. In another terrorism case, French-Canadian university student Alexander Bissonnette appears in a Quebec court on Tuesday, charged with 6 murders and attempted murders involving an attack on the Quebec City Mosque in January. The UN-brokered Syrian peace talks reconvene in Geneva on Wednesday. The talks were scheduled for February the 8th, but were delayed to give the Russian-brokered ceasefire a chance to implement itself. The agreement was reached between Moscow, Ankara, and Tehran to monitor a truce which went into effect on December the 30th. And that was next week's News Today so that you can plan to participate in the world around you. Stay tuned for Viewpoints Around the World with myself and Lockwood Phillips.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints Around the World, and of course, with our guest, Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio. Tom, let's continue this conversation. A few moments ago, you said, of course, the problem in Europe with Russia goes back centuries. Yes, we can see that, and of course, we can take it all the way back to World War I if you want.
No, you can take it back to the 13th century.
But you can, or the Napoleonic Wars. But recent history, the conflicts with Russia. What has happened with Russia that they have now become so aggressive, and why? What is Europe doing about it?
Well, Russia's always been paranoid, and they have never accepted the fact that they lost the Cold War. You talk to any Russian, and he'll say, "No, we didn't lose the Cold War. We're just sort of catching our breath."
Okay, that's fine. The fact that you're having this belligerence, what's the cause of the Russian belligerence?
The cause of the Russian belligerence is that they feel threatened. They're paranoid. They feel threatened by NATO. They lost their hegemony in Eastern Europe, and all the countries in Eastern Europe, still feeling threatened by Russia, signed up to join the EU and NATO as protection in case Russia came back again. Russia interpreted that as a threat to their security. What you've got from stretching all the way from Moscow to the North Sea is what's called the North European Plain, which is perfect tank country.
Okay,
and tanks can go sweeping into Russia whenever they want, and they can go the other way.
But here's my question. That's fine. What is it that the Europeans and the Russians could do to calm this issue down? What can be done? I mean, you've mentioned NATO, and of course, you've been critical, and apparently the European press has been critical of President Trump's criticism of NATO. Yet you've said that NATO is one of the causes of this discomfort. What can be done? Because it's really not benefiting anyone right now.
I think what needs to be done is to be quite honest, for Russia to become more democratic.
No,
which
on.
It certainly isn't. I know we shouldn't be telling Russia what sort of government it has or doesn't have. But if it had a government which was more or less similar and shared certain political values, if it shared things, then you'd be more likely to get on with it.
It's not that's
we did with Yeltsin,
but that's not going to happen. I'm looking for: is there any effort between the European community and Russia to work out some sort of understanding? I understand that what you're saying about Russia would be beneficial. I'm just curious because we got to move on. But is there, in light of the fact that there's concerns that Trump is making creating relations with Russia, that you said a few moments ago he's in the pocket with Putin, or in Putin's pocket, what can be done? And I'm just curious, is there anything happening in Europe right now to open lines of communication?
Yes, there are lines of communication all the time. Angela Merkel's talking with Putin all the time. She speaks Russian.
Okay. All right.
They are literally talking all the time, but they're not getting anywhere. One of the problems, quite honestly, is you can't believe a word that Putin says.
Okay.
He you talk about post-truth and alternative facts. Putin is a master of it. He keeps denying that there is any Russian support for Eastern Ukraine.
Okay. So, all right. So there's this distrust. Okay. I want to move on to a few other items here before we take the next break. Let's look at one other quick question associated with Russia. What's happening in Russia, but also with the experiences in the Middle East. And I'm wondering, where is Europe's focus? Is it on Russia, or is it on the Middle East, or is it possibly on both at the same time?
It is, and it really depends on where you are in Europe,
okay,
who you are, and what day of the week it is.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, sometimes there's a greater threat from the Middle East than there is from Russia, and vice versa.
Okay.
And in Eastern and Central Europe, they're more concerned about Russia than they are about the Middle East.
All right.
They're not really affected by Islamic jihadists or anything like that. They're not really affected by the refugees. But they are very much affected by the Russians. All right. The French, the Germans, the Brits, it's the other way around. The Italians.
Okay.
They're more affected by the terrorism and the threat of refugees. But even within those West European countries, there's a difference of opinion, because although the man in the street sees the greatest threat as being from Islamic jihadists, the people in the diplomatic and defense establishment actually see a greater threat from Russia.
Okay. All right. We've got a caller standing by before we go to the break, and then we're going to move on to other issues besides Russia. We've got Walter and Lyons joining us. Walter, very quickly. Yes, sir.
Well, listen, I feel I'm living in an alternate world because I listened to British radio this morning almost all morning, and I didn't hear the word Putin. I didn't hear the word Russia. I didn't hear the word submarine or destroyer. All I heard about was the Brits are the increase in racial crime is up in the counties, and cops weren't going after criminals because they're afraid they're going to get knifed. Now, it seemed to me that the hate, it was very paradoxical because it seemed to me that there was nothing but hate about Trump and hate about Brexit. They hate Brexit. Therefore, they hate Trump. It's a parallel thing. The immigrants are saying, oh, well, the increase in hate is terrible in Britain because the demographics are changing. But nobody talks about the hate for Brexit and Trump. I'm surprised.
Okay. Thanks very much, Walter. Appreciate that call. I'm going to let Tom wrap it up before we go to the break. Tom, what about that in London and
okay, well,
UK?
I would say if you listen to American radio, you probably get a lot of news about America and not so much about Britain. And that's certainly the case. I think what Walter's referring to, there were stories this morning saying that the incidents of hate crime since July are up 50%, the reporting of hate crime against Polish people and so forth. And it's basically being attributed to the fact that people feel enabled by the Brexit vote, which was in many ways an anti-immigrant vote.
Really? Okay. This is anti-immigration. All right. We're going to get back to that in a few moments. We're listening, of course, to Viewpoints Around the World. And, of course, Tom Arms joining us with Look Ahead News. So it's Look Ahead Radio, heard every Friday evening here on the talk station and other radio stations around the country and around the world, as a matter of fact. And LookAheadNews.com, which you can sign up for, no charge. Go to LookAheadNews.com. Stay with us.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment. We now return to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints Around the World, and of course with our guest Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio. We've got a caller standing by. I'm going to go to Gary very quickly because I want to move on to other issues. But Gary in Oriental, welcome to Viewpoints Around the World. Yes, sir.
Hey, Lockwood. Hey, Tom. Tom, you'd made a point where you were discussing the man in the street in the UK, and his biggest topic of conversation was the immigrants. Now, here, this is kind of how I size it up. If you look at Europe, you look at Germany, the UK, France, the United States too. We've got a problem, a huge problem with unvetted immigrants. And you said that Brexit was an anti-immigrant resolution. I don't agree with that, but that's another topic. Russia has not been factually proven to do anything as of yet. Yes, they've got a cruiser sitting off the coast of Connecticut 30 miles off. It's international waters. They've not done anything yet. When the hell are these countries, including the United States, to quit focusing on Russia and focus on the real issues and support our presidents or prime ministers and get down to business and forget about Russia? Until Putin does something, this is really a non-issue.
Gary, thank you very much. I'm going to give him an opportunity to respond to that. I see where you're coming from. Thank you for the call. Tom?
Okay, I'll try and keep it short.
Okay.
And that is, when Putin does respond, the impact would be much greater than the terrorist threat from any Islamic jihadist. It will be, a much bigger response. And that is the worry. It may not come for a while, but if he does, it could be much, much worse.
Okay.
Whereas 1/3 of 1% of all homicides in America were committed by terrorists. That's a very small percentage. I know that it hits headlines and there's a perceived threat, but the perceived threat is much smaller than the much greater threat elsewhere, in the opinion of the defense and diplomatic establishment.
Okay, I want to move on to other items. Very interesting in your comment on that one. And the other aspect of Gary's remarks are we need to take care of issues at home. And that's quite frankly been one of the complaints, I would argue, about the issue of Brexit, that the British populace were very unhappy with the arrangements of the EU. What is the future of the euro and the union in light of the fact that Greece is having some challenges? Their economy continues to decline. There was even a veiled threat that Greece would leave the euro and peg the drachma to the dollar. Is there concerns that the euro and the European Union is beginning to fall apart? Yes or no?
Well, you ask me this every week, and certainly the euro has problems and the European Union has problems. If we're talking about Greece, the general opinion here is that we've got 3 big European elections this year. Greece will be drip-fed just to keep it afloat, and the same with Italy. Italy has problems too. They'll be drip-fed until the last of those elections, which is Germany in the autumn. No exact date yet. The last of those elections is out of the way. Then there's going to be some very, very tough talking indeed.
Okay.
Now, on the question of should Greece leave the euro, if it leaves the euro and goes into the drachma, supported by the dollar or not, the drachma will probably lose 50% at least of its value.
Okay. And so
overnight.
Okay.
And it still owes all that money to the German and the French and the Dutch banks.
Right.
And so it's going to owe twice as much as it owes now. So it's not really a possibility.
All right. Let's move on to, you brought up the French. Let's bring this to the topic of the French. A lot of interest in the French elections. Again, it gets very, very, very fussy and very detailed. I don't want to get into the details, but what is the potential of the French elections on the European Union? And yes, we focus on the European Union each evening because, quite frankly, that is the largest unit now in the in Western Europe, and it is the European Union and NATO that is facing this threat from Russia and also from the Middle East. So, what about the French? What role will this play in the future of the European Union?
Well, it's very interesting what's happening in France at the moment. You've got this man called Emmanuel Macron, who has appeared out of literally almost nowhere. He's never held elected office.
Okay.
And he is racing up the opinion polls. He's now in second place behind Marine Le Pen, which was where the Republican candidate was just a few weeks ago, but he's been sort of knocked out by a scandal involving his wife. Now, this chap is a centrist. He is right down the middle. And I think that's what makes him very interesting. He's not on the far right and he's not on the far left. So he's not trying to answer the populist right by moving to the left. He's trying to fill the yawning chasm which has appeared in the center ground. If he is successful, and if he's elected president in May, then I think that could put at least a slowdown, a break on the movements to the left or the right, the divisions that are appearing in Europe.
Are these
and
divisions
will possibly have an impact elsewhere in the world as well, including the U.S.?
All right. What are the causes of these divisions in Europe right now, Tom? Very quickly. I think they go back. I think they go back to the 2007-2008 financial crisis, from which the Western world has not recovered. How about politics?
It hasn't recovered, and people feel, their standard of living has stagnated.
But what about
done by? They've been cheated by the bankers. The government is doing nothing to keep the banks under control, and so they're turning to alternative forms of government.
But wait a second.
Political thought.
Wasn't that the purpose of the European Union, to create a general oversight of all these various institutions that were all unique? Was not?
No, of course not.
Okay, very quickly, what is the European?
It was started in the 50s as the coal and steel community, And the idea was to pool the resources of coal and steel, which were seen as crucial to the economies of Europe.
But they're not anymore.
To create economic interdependence in order to basically rule out the possibility of war, that it would be more expensive to fight each other than it would be to get along with each other.
All right. That's what it was originally designed for, but that's not what it has become.
That's still the main driving force behind it.
Well, then,
I mean, it has grown into. I'm sorry, Lockwood, I'm interrupting you.
No, I'm just saying we'll get into other items at a later time. How's the economy in Western Europe doing? Is it improving?
No.
Okay.
It's stagnating.
All right. You've given me.
It's stagnating.
Okay.
I mean, Germany is doing all right, but still it's only about 1.5% growth.
All right.
The British are starting to feel the pinch since they left Brexit. They've only just started doing that. It's sort of delayed, but the inflation's starting to go up.
Okay.
And Western European economies are stagnating. The French are in a mess.
All right. Let's talk very quickly. You mentioned Germany a few moments ago. What's the status of Germany? Is any improvement, anything new coming out of Germany at this point?
Well, we just had a new president elected. Now, the president has a ceremonial role primarily.
Okay.
But I think it's important to note that he's very pro-EU. He's center-left. So, again, we have a sort of centrist figure. He's very well respected. He was the foreign minister. His name's Steinmeier.
Okay.
One thing about him is that he's with the Social Democratic Party, which is the main opposition party to Angela Merkel. So if he's successful as president, that could make it a little bit more difficult for Merkel to be elected.
Okay. We'll get back to this and a few other items as we wrap it up this evening with Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio and LookAheadNews.com. You're listening to Viewpoints Around the World.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
Observations of an Expat by Tom Arms from LookAheadNews.com. Mind the gap. 3 very familiar monosyllabic words for anyone who's travelled on the London Underground. The taped announcement is a warning to beware of the potentially dangerous space between the railway carriages and the platform. But any political novice will also tell you to mind the gap. Look for the space that isn't being filled by the other parties and plug it fast. Well, at the moment there's a yawning chasm as the traditional parties race to head off threats from the right and left, leaving a vacuum in the centre, the traditional winning ground. But have the divisions that currently afflict Western societies become so acute that the centre ground is now politically unviable? We will find out, or at least be presented with a good indication at the end of April and then again in May. That is when the French elect their president. And it is looking increasingly likely as if the battle will be between the far-right Marie Le Pen and her National Front Party and Emmanuel Macron's newly formed En Marche, English translation, Forward. A few weeks ago, the political landscape looked completely different. The 2 top contenders were Marie Le Pen and François Fillon. Macron and socialist candidate Benoît Hamon were also rans. Then along came Fillongate. It was revealed that the Republican presidential candidate paid his wife nearly €1 million out of government money for work she never did. The revelations appear to have been a fatal blow to the presidential aspirations of Fillon, and a fibrillator-type boost to the hopes of Macron, who overnight leapt to the number 2 slot in the opinion polls. Macron has several things in common with Donald Trump. He's a businessman. He has never held elected office. His rise to power has been meteoric, private sector to economic advisor to minister of the economy in 2 years. But that is where the comparison ends. Macron is young, 39. His wife is beautiful, but 24 years older than him. Most of all, Emmanuel Macron is a straight down-the-middle, pro-Europe, free-market, old-fashioned, middle-of-the-road political, cultural, and economic centrist liberal. When he speaks, it is with the dispassionate, fact-filled voice of common sense, rather than the tub-thumping populist post-truth rhetoric that has come to dominate Western politics. French voters had hoped that François Fillon would fill that role, but he moved the Republican Party to the right to counter the threat of anti-immigrant, anti-EU National Front candidate Marie Le Pen. Then he was caught with his hand in the till. Socialist Benoît Hamon is campaigning on an unelectable far-left platform. At a time when the French economy is struggling to stay afloat, the former education minister proposes to reduce the working week from 35 to 32 hours, tax companies that use robots, and wants to introduce a universal basic income. Looming over the French political landscape is Marie Le Pen. The darling of the far right is currently holding the number one spot, 27% according to a Valentine's Day poll. But France has a two-round presidential polling system. Anyone can put their name on the ballot paper in the first round on the 23rd of April, and if any of the candidates in that round achieve the highly unlikely goal of 51% of the electorate, then they become president. If no one does, and no one ever has, then the two top candidates moved for second round on May 7th, and the winner of that round moves into the Élysée Palace. At the moment, opinion polls say that Macron would win 69% of the vote in round two, and possibly set Europe back on the liberal centrist path.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world, and of course our guest Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio. Tom, I do want to ask you about Turkey, but there's another story I would like to follow up on very quickly. We were chatting about the issue of military actions. Two recent stories, I'm curious how they're being played. North Korea had a ballistic missile test, and the more interesting story, the assassination of Kim Il, or is it Kim Un? I'm never sure which one it is.
Kim Jong-nam is the one who was assassinated. Kim Jong-un is the
brother,
dictator.
Yeah, it's Kim Jong-un's half-brother was assassinated. What's the story on that? How is that being played in Europe?
Well, it's like Game of Thrones gone wild. I mean, I mean, what a family. I mean, they're just half-brothers all over the place, mistresses, wives. It seems like one of Kim Jong-nam's major roles was laundering dirty money from their drug and prostitution rackets.
Now, wait a second, Tom. How do you know that this is that's potentially questionable description? How do we know that it was they're running these kind of
apparently that's what the security service is saying.
Yeah, but we need to have that,
and that's the reason why he was based in Macau, because there's a lot of casinos there, so you can run the money through them.
Well, we should not, that could be described as fake news until we have verification of it. Let's just leave it at that. My question to you,
alternative fact maybe.
Yeah, my comment though is very interesting to compare that to Game of Thrones, and I can see that being developed as a potential online game as we speak. The other aspect of the ballistic missile test.
Well, it's very worrying.
Okay,
it's extremely worrying. The Japanese are terrified, as you know. Everyone's extremely concerned about it. It's going to be possibly Trump's biggest test, and if he can pull that off with the Chinese, then he would. It's going to take Chinese involvement. The Chinese are not putting pressure on North Koreans because they're concerned that if they put pressure on North Koreans, they're going to get millions of North Koreans flooding across the border as refugees.
That is a humorous prospect in light of the fact that we've got refugees flooding the borders into Greece and Italy and the Balkans. Tom, let's move on to that since we're talking about refugees, because we've only got a few minutes left. I want to get to the love potion discovery as well. All right, let's talk about Turkey. What's happening there?
Well, Turkey is very interesting. There are two issues there, and one is Russia, and the other one is, of course, the referendum. There's going to be a referendum on the 16th of April, and the issue is whether or not to give the president, Erdogan, virtual dictatorial powers or not, which he would have until 2029 because he's locked up 140,000 of his opponents.
Right.
So that's one issue. The other one is this bromance that's going on between Erdogan and Putin at the moment. You may have noticed that the Russian ambassador was murdered. Well, Putin just shrugged his shoulders. That 3 Turkish soldiers were killed by friendly Russian fire. Erdogan just shrugged his shoulders. Question is why? Because they need each other at the moment. But I don't think they're going to need each other for much longer than, say, a year or two. As soon as the Syrian situation is sorted out and they've worked out some sort of peace agreement, then I can see them falling apart very quickly over the issue of Kurds. Right. Because Putin wants to support some sort of autonomy for Syrian Kurds, and these are the people who are feeding the Kurdish terrorists in Turkey.
Okay, let's move to Love Potion. They've discovered something in London?
Yeah. They've discovered the hormone that is produced by your brain that creates sexual arousal, and they've managed to extract it and inject it. Not sexual arousal, but
you had me worried there for a moment. Okay,
romance. Okay. Romance and sexual arousal. So it's the ultimate love potion. Not only do you get them falling over, they actually fall in love with you.
Is this going to be sold on the open market, or is this?
If you're thinking about it.
All right.
So keep all your stuff away from you. Have someone taste your food, because all those women that you employ might just.
Oh, right. All right. I love that. When was what pharmacy discovered this? We need to probably buy.
This is a university.
University.
Imperial College.
Okay, I was going to say, can we buy stock in it? It probably has some real potential. Hogwarts, according to Ross, possibly. It's going to be an interesting week. What's ahead for us, Tom?
Well, we've got more discussions in the House of Lords over Brexit. We have a meeting of the Eurozone finance ministers next week to talk about Greece.
All right.
We have a continuation of the Munich Security Conference. Mike Pence is in Brussels. There's a lot happening.
And then, of course, we'll be interested to watch, and of course, this happened today with Bibi Netanyahu's arrival in the States. So it'll be.
Well, yeah, we need to put some flesh on that. It's not clear whether or not we're going to have a 2-state, 1-state solution. If we're shifting to a 1-state solution, a lot of people are going to be very cross with Mr. Trump because he didn't bother to discuss it. He just did it.
Well, we don't know yet what he's done, but at the same time, candidly, that is his modus operandi. Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com. You can sign up for free. Please join him. And, of course, listen to him every Friday here on Look Ahead Radio.
Look Ahead Radio is a production of the Talk Station.